2 months ago, Dan Gavitt said NCAA tournament expansion was, quote, unlikely to come soon. That's not at all the message we just heard from NCAA President Charlie Baker. Uh-oh.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can all check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And to give a special shout out, of course, to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Got a lot to cover today. Six-pack with some international flavor today as we discuss 6 Euro signings around college basketball. We're going to get to that to close out the show. We also got a pair of former Tar Heels committing elsewhere out of the transfer portal. One of them going to a rival after saying he was not planning to go anywhere. There's a little drama going on in the triangle out there in North Carolina. We'll talk about that. But first, we start with the storyline that seemingly we're always talking about, at least once, twice, 3 times per offseason here on Locked On College Basketball, and that is NCAA tournament expansion. Charlie Baker, the current president of the NCAA, said at the Big 12 spring meetings about a week or so ago, as we're recording this, he said, quote, that would be the goal to try and do this for next year. We've been talking about 72 and 76 teams. Not a huge shock to hear Charlie Baker be in favor of NCAA tournament expansion. Not a big shock to hear him talking about 72 or 76 teams, which would be either a 4 or 8 team expansion from the current 68 team field that we have. The shocker in this update is Baker talking about wanting to get this done for next year, as in the upcoming NCAA tournament in 2026. I don't think many of us thought that the NCAA tournament we just covered a few months ago in March was going to be the final NCAA tournament with 68 teams, and it still may not be. This is far from guaranteed, but it is also a turn of events in terms of when most people had been expecting this conversation to happen. And to be clear, I am of the mindset that NCAA tournament expansion is going to happen. I am not of the mindset particularly liking it. I'm coming around to it in some ways, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm still not really in favor of it, just think it might be the lesser of certain evils that could come out of this. But literally 2 months ago, Dan Gavitt, the NCAA senior vice president for basketball operations, like the guy in charge of NCAA basketball, he had a quote 2 months ago where he said a decision on NCAA tournament expansion was, quote, unlikely to come soon. And when pressed further about it, he said, quote, expansion, even at a modest level, is complex, more complex, I think, than has been recognized and reported because it is expensive. It's expensive because of additional team travel, per diem, game operations, but also the basketball performance funds, the units that are earned throughout the men's and women's basketball championships. To be clear, those are hurdles that are surmountable within a year frame. Like, I don't think that those things, as said by Dan Gavitt, are going to make it impossible for the NCAA tournament to expand to 72 teams or 76 teams between now and March of 2026. But it is telling, or at least unusual, eyebrow raising, whatever phrase you want to use, that within 6 weeks or so of the NCAA senior vice president saying, we don't think a decision is coming soon, not like we don't think implementation is coming soon. We don't think we're going to reach a decision about whether we're going to expand the NCAA tournament anytime soon, to then have Charlie Baker saying, we'd like to get it done this year. Those are pretty competing ideologies. And perhaps it's as simple as Charlie Baker's just, rallying the troops and trying to get his message out there, which is, we want this, we want it now. That's what he's hearing. That's what he's feeling from, Greg Sankey and the other Big Ten or big conference commissioners who are pushing for this. But maybe Dan Gavitt is playing the cards a little bit differently. But it's notable that these are the messages from the two kind of most important figures that we've heard in the last few months regarding NCAA tournament expansion. So what it would look like, obviously 4 more at-large bids if they went up to 72, 8 more at-large bids if they went up to 76. There's some logistical things that I think are challenging, not just the stuff that Dan Gavitt laid out, like how expensive it is and the team travel and per diem and all that stuff, which again, I think is doable for I don't think any of that stuff that is going to be such a huge hurdle that they can't get it done. But when are you going to play these games? Like, I think to me that stands out of like, you have Selection Sunday. You're not, from a branding perspective, you're not getting rid of Selection Sunday. That's such a huge pull for college basketball. I'd be shocked if they tried to move on from that. And I don't think you want to move on from that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday epicness where you go from 64 teams to 16 teams in a matter of 4 long days. So if you want to keep those games starting on Thursday and you want to keep Selection Sunday, that limits you to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, more realistically Tuesday, Wednesday, which is when those games typically happen, in order to get now what's going to look like 8 to 12 different games. You're going to have different locations, which I think is doable, but you might still have to have teams finding out that they're getting a spot in a play-in game and then having to turn around pretty much immediately and fly somewhere potentially far away and play a game like that day, or not that day, but like the next day or very soon afterwards. I just think logistically there's a lot of challenges there. Again, not things that they cannot overcome, but things that I don't think will make the product particularly good. I think the play-in games will be sloppy and ugly. They already kind of are, in part because of how quick that turnaround is. But I also think you're going to get teams that are playing into this tournament and then really struggling. I just don't think it makes the product better. And again, as we've talked about so many times in the show, and I don't want to relitigate too much because most of you probably already know this, but the people pushing for NCAA tournament expansion are not pushing for the teams that many college basketball fans would like to see. The Indiana States, the UC Irvines, the San Franciscos, the mid-major teams that are frequently kind of on the bubble, but not super realistically on the bubble. The teams that, last year, the Big West had 2 great teams, and UC San Diego won the Big West tournament, so they made it, but UC Irvine did not. And every year, like Indiana State was a great example of one of the highest teams in the net era to not make the tournament, despite winning a bunch of games and being great. Under Coach Josh Schertz a few years ago with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Robbie Avila on the roster. And like, if those were the teams that would make it, I'd be a lot more on board. But they're not, because the people pushing for this, like we said, are Greg Sankey and the commissioner of the Big Ten and Big 12. And like, they want more of their teams in the conference or in the tournament. Do we really want that? Last year, 14 out of the 16 SEC teams made it. So already that's way more than you need. That's almost all of them. Only LSU and South Carolina didn't make it. And while the SEC was great last year and we've been singing their praises, and justifiably so, people say, well, they got 14 teams in, but also they got a bunch of Elite 8 teams, and they had 2 teams in the Final Four. Sure, 6 of their 14 teams that made the tournament last year were seeded 8 or lower. Of those 6 teams in the first round, they went 1-5. The only team that won in the SEC that was an 8 seed or lower was Arkansas. Shout out John Calipari, by the way, for finally getting some W's as a lower seeded team in the tournament. That's kind of a fun storyline that we talked about a bit. But the other teams struggled. Gonzaga crushed Georgia. St. Mary's destroyed Vanderbilt. Or that was actually a closer game, but they beat them. Either way, they beat them. Baylor beat Mississippi State. UConn beat Oklahoma. Xavier beat Texas in the play-in game. All those teams struggled. And sure, other conferences, had teams like the ACC had a handful of teams that struggled that made the tournament and whatnot. And we're picking on the SEC a little bit, but yeah, like the narrative that the SEC was great last year is true, but it doesn't mean that they're mediocre teams. I mean, Oklahoma went 6-12 in the conference and then got destroyed by UConn in the NCAA tournament. Do they realistically need to make it? Would the world have been worse off if Oklahoma was replaced by UC Irvine or San Francisco or an Indiana State type team? Probably not, because what likely would have happened is the same thing. San Francisco would have snuck in and got beat badly by UConn. I think I'd still rather see that. And no knock on Porter Moser in Oklahoma. It's just you go 6-12 in your league, you probably shouldn't make the tournament. And now they want more. They want more teams of that ilk making the dance. I'm not in favor of that. The reason that I've come around to NCAA tournament expansion a little bit is because I fear that it becomes eventually will kind of come to a choice of either it's expanding the NCAA tournament or it's a quest or a push to get rid of the automatic qualifiers, which to me is a death sentence. That is a hugely problematic potential outcome of these conversations. If we feel at all like they're going to try to take away the automatic qualifiers, which is the rule that every conference their champion gets into the NCAA tournament, bar none. Unquestionably, they get in. If that rule goes away, then what is the point? Then immediately you have 200 out of the 364 Division I teams that pretty much have a less than 0.1% chance of ever making it. Just instantly they're done. Right now, every team has a chance. And up until about March 1st, every team has a chance. Then you finally start to get some teams eliminated. Some of the conferences that don't have conference tournaments, those teams are mathematically eliminated. But the season starts in November, and up until late February, early March, every team in theory has a chance to make it. If you get rid of the automatic qualifier, that immediately is gone, instantly gone. And that I don't think that is what we want in college basketball. College basketball, the magic of the sport is how anything can happen, is the Cinderella, the upset story. That's what everybody loves about this sport. And yes, you could make an argument, TV's numbers are going to be better if there's more teams that people have heard of. I don't know if that's true, but also, even if it is true, even if you think, more Northwestern fans are going to tune in if they make the tournament, or whatever argument you want to use, you're destroying what makes this product great. And it is one of the most lucrative, successful, still pure, or as pure as it can be, products in professional or / amateur in quotes sports. And you're wanting to destroy it to get more crappy teams into the field instead of potentially rewarding these really fun mid-major teams that people would love to root for. I'm just not a fan. I'm way less of a fan of losing the automatic qualifiers. And if expanding and adding four more at-large play-in teams, even if they're crappy sub-500 power conference teams, if that will quiet that potential to lose the automatic qualifier, fine, so be it. Let's do it. Add those teams, figure out the logistics. We'll play some crappy basketball on Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll have a few teams probably get dunked on early in the NCAA tournament because they're exhausted, and some people in the SEC and Big Ten will be a little bit happier and a little bit richer. Fine. If that's what we need to do to prevent the loss of what makes college basketball great, the automatic qualifier system, then fine. Let's do it. Let's knock it out. We can even get it done by 2026, apparently, according to Charlie Baker. Well, speaking of mixed messaging, didn't Ven-Allen Lubin assure North Carolina fans that he was entering the transfer portal with every intention of returning? Maybe he got Chapel Hill and Raleigh, North Carolina mixed up. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, can't-miss moments as we are a day away from the start of the NBA Finals. So whether it's a game-winning shot like Tyrese Halliburton had, a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game, both before tip-off and live during the contest. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Folks, we're about to talk about Ven-Allen Lubin, and of course you heard an interview with NC State's hosts on Tuesday's show, so if you're feeling good about the Wolfpack, they're up to plus 6,000 to win that 2026 national championship. Meanwhile, North Carolina is at plus 4,000. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, moving away from our conversation about NCAA tournament expansion to instead talk about a pair of transfer portal commitments that happened over the last week or so, both involving the North Carolina Tar Heels. If you listened to Monday's episode of Locked On College Basketball, you know that our co-host, our fearless co-leader, Isaac Shade, is out of town celebrating a family vacation in early June. Perfectly great time to take a vacation as a college basketball podcast host. He's also the host of Locked On Tar Heels, and it was a bummer of a week. It's a bummer of a week for Mr. Shade to be gone, as not only did he pre-record a fantastic interview with the hosts of the Locked On Wolfpack podcast, but his guy, Ven-Allen Lubin from North Carolina, commits to NC State in the transfer portal, a huge storyline. Obviously, if you were somebody who listens to the interview with the NC State host yesterday, you noticed that there was not any conversation about Ven-Allen Lubin because it was recorded prior to that happening. Again, just one of those things that happens sometimes and you get some bad luck with your timing. But who could have possibly thought this was coming? Not Ven-Allen Lubin, because he very clearly said when he entered the transfer portal back in April, it was a surprise decision to enter the portal. And he came out, he posted on social media and said, he is doing so, quote, with the full intention on returning to UNC. That's what he said. He said he had every intention of not actually transferring, but returning to North Carolina. He said he was being cautious regarding the House versus NCAA settlement, and that this was basically the decision to enter the transfer portal was out of an abundance of caution. It didn't really make sense at the time. There are players who are entering the transfer portal in part to try to make an argument with the NCAA to maintain eligibility. We have seen that with a handful of players who are currently listed as being in the transfer portal, but who do not have any more college basketball eligibility. And again, that makes sense if you think that your waiver is more likely to be approved if you're in the transfer portal. But I don't really like Ven-Allen Lubin spent a year at Notre Dame. He spent a year at Vanderbilt. He spent a year at North Carolina. Other than not being able to make up his mind on where he wants to play, there was no gap years in between. There's no JUCO, anything like that. He played 3 seasons of college basketball. So eligibility wasn't really a concern. So I don't really know what exactly his plan was, what exactly his thought was, but it seems fairly clear at this point that him saying, I'm doing this with the intention of returning to North Carolina was not true. He may have meant it at the time. I don't think he was planning this at that moment, but man, does it not look good. Like, man. Like to not only go back on your word to say you're going to stay at a school. I mean, your coaching staff was presumably expecting you to return. They were not filling that spot. So then to make a late decision in the transfer portal process to leave your school, it leaves North Carolina high and dry without many options available to them in the transfer portal or international market to fill out the power forward center front court position vacated by Lubin's departure. But he also goes to a rival. I mean, man, oh man, that is some nasty work from Ven-Allen Lubin. To go to NC State, to go to one of the biggest rivals. I mean, obviously North Carolina Duke is the rivalry. We're not debating that. It is the rivalry. But North Carolina NC State is a brutal, long, historic rivalry. And to leave North Carolina for that bitter rival after promising the coaching staff and the fan base that you were going to stay, I can't think of more kind of betrayal type things that we've seen in college. We've seen players transfer to rivals before. It's becoming more and more common, but I don't know if any of them have had this type of backstory around them. Like this is some tricky stuff, some tricky business. Ven-Allen Lubin was perfectly fine for North Carolina last year. 20 starts out of 37 games, played about 20 minutes a night, averaged about 9 points, 5.5 boards, was very efficient as a low post scorer, about 70% on his 2-pointers. He was very good down the stretch. Final 14 games of the season, he averaged 13 points, 6.5 boards. But yeah, UNC was now expecting to have him back. They finally filled a really critical hole replacing Greg Powell by landing small forward from Montenegro, Luka Bogavac, who we're going to talk about in the final segment of the show. But he's not replacing Ven-Allen Lubin, and now the options to do so in the transfer portal are incredibly limited. There are not a lot of bigs who are available right now. We'll see what North Carolina is able to do. Will Wade's not making any friends in the ACC, but he's got himself a dang talented roster. Again, if you want a more complete picture on what's going on at NC State, definitely listen to that episode on Tuesday with the hosts of the Wolfpack podcast. But man, now you add Ven-Allen Lubin to the mix alongside Darion Williams and Jerry Dent and Terrence Arsenault and the many other players coming in to this NC State program. And I'll tell you this, I'm still continue to be miffed by the ACC's decision to only have NC State and North Carolina play each other once this year in the regular season. That game is in Raleigh. There will not be a game in Chapel Hill between NC State and North Carolina. I'm not saying that that's part of the reason for Ven-Allen Lubin doing what he did, but man, he's got to feel a little bit more comfortable knowing he doesn't got to go play in Chapel Hill this upcoming season and face the wrath of that North Carolina fan base. Also want to talk about one other player hitting the transfer portal out of North Carolina that's probably not doing so with nearly as much vitriol from the fan base. They weren't happy with him during the season, but I don't think they're super happy or they're super miffed to see him out the door. That's Cade Tyson. Cade Tyson commits to Minnesota in the Big Ten out of the transfer portal. Tyson completely bombed in his lone year with the Tar Heels. 2.5 points, 1.5 rebounds per, not even 1.1 rebounds per game last year in just under 8 minutes per game for the Heels. Only shot 29% from three. And these were numbers coming off of a season where he was excellent at Belmont. He was a really highly regarded player in the transfer portal when he committed to North Carolina last year, because at Belmont, as a sophomore, he averaged 16 points, 6 boards, shot 46.5% from three, was second in the country in 3-point rate behind Kobe Brea, who of course went to Kentucky, was lights out, and is now a likely NBA draft pick. Cade Tyson went the opposite direction. He couldn't get on the floor for North Carolina. He was not consistent at all. He put it this way, he scored 81 points at North Carolina this last year. He made 83s as a sophomore at Belmont. He was a completely different player. And Coach Niko Medved, the new head coach for Minnesota, coming over from Colorado State, he's banking on maybe getting a version of Cade Tyson that looks more like what he was at Belmont than what he was last year at North Carolina. Because if they get that 6'7" wing who can absolutely splash from beyond the arc, they're going to be quite happy. It's been a solid offseason for Minnesota, again, replacing Ben Johnson with Niko Medved. They had Bobby Durkin from Davidson. He's a great, great player. Jalen Crocker-Johnson follows Medved from Colorado State to Minnesota. Chance Stevens comes over from Maryland. Chancey Willis Jr. from Western Michigan. This is a really talented roster. And if they can get something out of Cade Tyson, this team that shot 32% from three last year, if they can get him to be, he doesn't have to average 16 and a half a game, but if he can be much closer to that player, that's a really good coup for Coach Medved and the Golden Gophers. But obviously you're taking on a pretty big risk with a player who really struggled to even find himself on the floor last year for the Tar Heels. Well, it's not all bad news for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels, who landed a much needed starting small forward in Luka Bogavac. We'll talk about him and some other Euro additions across the college basketball landscape coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we are closing out the show with a six-pack, as we do so often on our Monday shows, usually when Isaac and I are together, but a solo six-pack today, and one with a little international flavor to it, as we're talking about international European signings across college basketball. Grabbed 6 of them that have all happened in the last week or so, as it's become very, very common and popular to bring in those international players, especially as the transfer portal has died down and teams are starting to figure out what are the holes we still have on our roster, what are some ways we can go fill them. The most notable of these additions, we've hinted at it a few times already, Luka Bogavac from Montenegro, 6'5" wing, joining the North Carolina Tar Heels. And in a reminder that college basketball is no longer what it used to be, Luka Bogavac is 22 years old, or he's going to be 22 when the season begins. He is a freshman. He will be a 22-year-old freshman who has played multiple professional seasons. I'm not saying this should be the barrier, but this dude has a Wikipedia page. This dude is a professional athlete overseas in Montenegro, and now he's coming to North Carolina to immediately step into a starting role. They didn't bring him here to come off the bench. He's going to start at the 3. He's replacing Drake Powell. He'll start alongside Kyan Evans and Seth Trimble in that backcourt for the Tar Heels. 15 points, 40% from 3 last year in the ABA. This is a really talented guy who's going to make some real noise in the ACC. A much needed win for North Carolina after a series of L's throughout the offseason. We're talking international additions, so of course we're talking about Tommy Lloyd and the Arizona Wildcats. They land themselves a 6'6", 230-pound wing from Germany in Ivan Kharchenkov. He's 19 years old, so much more quote-unquote normal age for a player coming across the pond to play here in the States. Already seen some places that have him as a fringe first-round pick in the 2026 draft. Joins a very, very talented incoming recruiting class for Tommy Lloyd and the Wildcats, not just with Braxton Burries and Koa Pete and the phenomenal domestic freshmen they have coming in, but they got some international guys coming in as well. Dwayne Aristati, CD Gee, and then I will not attempt to pronounce the other player they have coming in as well. They got 4 international players joining the roster alongside the 2 freshmen, keeping Jaden Bradley, keeping Mo Krivas, Toby Awaka returning, Anthony Del Orso as well. This is Kharchenkov coming in. He's kind of a good defender, great size for his position for a wing. Kind of a struggling outside shooter, so it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of find the offense and that rhythm for Coach Lloyd and the Wildcats, but a talented player who should play big minutes right away and kind of help supplant the loss of Carter Bryant, who's going to likely be a lottery pick in the NBA draft despite a fairly limited role last year for the Cats. Next up is Ohio State, also landing a German wing, a 6'5" wing from Germany in Mathieu Grujicic, who's playing for FC Barcelona. Last year, their second-level club, he averaged 13.5 points, 3.5 assists for their U18 roster, but he is a pure shooter, over 40% from 3. One of the youngest players, in fact, the youngest player to get minutes for this FC Barcelona team. He turns 18 in July. So I'm recording this right now. He's still 17 years old. He was the MVP of FIBA's Basketball Without Borders camp, which is a marquee event every I think it's in the winter that this event happens. It's a big time event. He was phenomenal in it. He's expected to be a backup for this team next year, which is not a surprise as an 18-year-old who just committed to a college program. He's probably going to back up Devin Royal at the small forward position for the Buckeyes. Joins Miles Hero, by the way, as a new commit. Miles Hero, the younger brother of Tyler Hero, who just committed to the Buckeyes as well. So they got two incoming players coming in. Grujicic is a guy who probably not a big-time contributor in year one, but don't be surprised if he's a name that starts to pop in the Big Ten in a year or two. A couple more. Speaking of the Big Ten, Penn State lands themselves a Turkish wing in Melih Tunca, 6'5" wing who played for Turkey's U20 team this past summer, where he's very, very good. 17.5 points, 6.5 assists, youngest player on the roster and put up those numbers. That is incredible. He's the second international addition for the Nittany Lions this offseason alongside Croatian center Ivan Juric. And we talked about Penn State last week as kind of a big loser out of the NBA draft withdrawal deadline, as they have not been able to replace Yannick Konen-Niederhauser, who stayed in the draft process after playing really well at the Combine. And look, Melih Tunca is a 6'5" wing. He's not replacing Yannick Konen-Niederhauser, who's a 6'10" shot blocker. But you're adding more talent to the roster. You got to feel good about that. So a solid get here for Mike Rhodes and the Nittany Lions as they look to get out of the cellar in the Big Ten. Back to the ACC we go with Stanford, the Cardinal landing a 6'10" Belgium center, Oscar Gilte, averaged 10 points, 6.5 boards, and over 3 blocks per game last year for the FIBA U18 team in Belgium. A much needed get for Stanford. They were one of the last teams in the high major college basketball space to land a transfer this year. They really just weren't able to fill a lot of the holes on their roster that they wanted to fill. I'm guessing NIL is a bit of an issue for Stanford. Obviously, transferring to Stanford is difficult academically, so you have that going against you. Now you have this intense amount of travel with Stanford joining the ACC. Kyle Smith's a great coach, but his back's up against the wall in terms of what he's able to do. So this is a huge addition for them. And again, much needed just in terms of talent for Stanford, but also needed front court talent after losing Maxime Reynaud, one of the best players in the ACC, one of the best players in college basketball last year. Reynaud in the draft process and very likely a first-round pick in a couple of weeks here, and they needed to find a way to replace him in the front court. They do that in Oscar Gilte. It will be interesting to see how much he plays right away in his first season. And then our last of our transfer portal or our Euro international six-pack here, Davidson lands themselves a 7-foot center from Spain in Ian Plateau, 17-year-old 7-footer. That's always good. Anytime you can get a teenager who's already 7 feet tall, you got to feel pretty good about that. He also put up great numbers last year for Joventut, 14.5 points, 12 boards, 3.5 assists per game, facing next-gen Euro League competition. He's considered like a playmaking hub, a guy you can feed the ball to, and he can make things work. Again, 4 assists per game as a big man at 17 years old is excellent. This is a really nice get for the Wildcats. Really nice get for them in the A-10, a program that has had international success in the past, that has had recruiting success in the past. Shout out Steph Curry, that lost a lot of their most talented players. We mentioned Bobby Durkin earlier, transferring to Minnesota. They lost some other really big pieces as well. And being able to get a 17-year-old who's got this kind of talent and skill set, it's rare to land a player who can be an offensive hub as a 7-footer at 17 years old, especially in the A-10. So this is a potential program-changing addition for the Wildcats of Davidson. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'll be back with you all and Leaf to Lean tomorrow, talking some NBA draft stuff. And then Isaac and I'll be back with you all on Friday as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until next time, peace out.